Good day, listeners to Martin Barna podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, and it is Mr. James Krieger. Hello, Mr. Krieger.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for accepting my invitation. Mr. Krieger is a scientist, author, coach, stock trader, and brains behind Weightology, FitProFinancial, and StockWonk. Mr. Krieger, I'm very surprised that you started also in the finances. I also invest in stocks, and it really it is good to hear that. How long it is since you started your stock journey?
Well, I started part-time trading in 2008, so I've been doing it a long time. And then I became a full-time day trader in late 2013. Did that for a year, and then I had some blow-ups, so I had to stop for a while. But then I did a lot of practice trading, paper trading on the side while I built Weightology. And then once I was ready, I got back into it, and now I'm pretty much a full-time trader. And in fact, my main source of income is my trading now versus Weightology. So actually, I probably spend most of my day in the markets versus the fitness field now. But yeah, so, and I've been doing that now probably a good 3 years full-time. In addition to Weightology, probably the past 3 years now. So
respect. That's great. And do you have still time for science or fitness?
Yeah, not as much now. So for example, my Weightology research review, I don't write as much for it now. Now I just try to kind of promote it, and I've got, some great scientists writing for it. Dr. Cody Hahn, Dr. Brandon Roberts, and also Dr. Astrid Naranjo, and they've been doing an awesome job. I still make contributions to it occasionally, but just from a bandwidth perspective, I haven't been able to do as many research reviews as I used to do. So
I can recommend this to anyone who is listening. It is a very good source of information, science-based. Okay, I have a few questions for you today. It is mostly about, not so surprising, but about the fitness. Mr. Krieger, how long should I rest between sets in a gym if my goal is hypertrophy versus if my goal is maximizing my strength? Is there a difference, or what difference there is?
Personally, I don't think there's much of a difference. I think if you're trying to maximize hypertrophy, you should take fairly long rests, at least for your compound movements. So, probably, at least 2 minutes, probably 3 minutes are better for some of your compound movements, especially stuff like squats and things like that. I think where you can get away with shorter rests is like just some isolation movements, like, bicep curls, tricep stuff, things like that. I think you can get away with shorter rests with that stuff. But for the most part, in fact, I was involved in a study with Brad Schoenfeld where we, directly looked at, short rests, 1 minute rest versus 3 minute rests, and 3 minute rests basically just were way better almost across the board for hypertrophy. So definitely better for the most part to take longer rests between sets, especially on your compound movements.
Even if, let's say, I'm training with my client and I see that he has no problems with the pauses, he could rest shorter, at least it seems like that. Still, I should give him at least 3 minutes, even if it is more trained or he has great cardiovascular training.
Yeah, I mean, because here's the deal. If you take short rests on compound movements, what it does is at least the hypothesis is that it might contribute to central nervous system fatigue. So you don't recruit your fibers as well, basically. And so like, I mean, if you're huffing and puffing between sets and you haven't really caught your breath, your rests are probably too short if you're trying to maximize hypertrophy.
Perfect, thank you. And is the failure necessary in your training?
No, I'd say overall the evidence seems to indicate that you can leave a few reps in the tank and still maximize hypertrophy. I would say the exception is if you're using light weights. If you're doing, 20 reps to failure or something like that, then I think you got to push closer to failure. But if you're training in that typical bodybuilding range, 8 to 12 reps, you can leave a couple reps in the tank, and you'll gain just as much size as if you push those reps to failure. So,
how many reps in reserve would you recommend in this case?
Usually 1 to 2, I think, is a good ballpark. So usually what I recommend to people is just stop when you notice have a noticeable slowdown in rep speed, so, once a set starts to feel like you're starting to really grind a rep, then that's, you probably don't need to do more. So you're just adding to fatigue without necessarily adding to the stimulus.
Thank you. And, when should I add more volume to my training, and how should I decide how much volume should I add?
Usually there was a good paper published recently that usually, about 20% increases in volume is a good number. As far as when to increase your volume, at least me personally, I just recommend whenever you hit a plateau, so, if you've been doing, let's say, 3 sets of an exercise for a while and you finally kind of hit a rut and you're not improving on that exercise anymore, then try bumping it up to 4 sets, see what happens. If that still doesn't stimulate further improvement, maybe try 1 more bump up in volume. If that still doesn't work, then maybe it's a time to then deload and back off for a period of time. But I typically favor fairly small increases in volume, and just use your performance as a dictator whether to increase your volume or not. So,
thank you. How many sets you think beginners should do, and how that changes when you get more advanced?
That's a really tough question. I'd say most beginners can just start off with 1 set per exercise, and maybe a couple exercises per muscle group. And I mean, I think that's good enough for a beginner. And then like I said, you just use volume as a progression, and you slowly progress. Even an advanced trainee, and I was just talking to Jeff Nippert about this the other day. I mean, an advanced trainee, even there, can be just fine with something like, maybe 6 to 8 sets per muscle group, maybe a couple times per week. So for most people, I mean, some people may need more than that. That's why I kind of I'm more at the point now where I favor an individualized approach and using volume just kind of as a progression tool. So, if you're at 8 sets per body part in a training session and you've plateaued, well, then try increasing it to 10 and see what happens, But I think, most people, I think, once they've kind of gone through that progression, I think a lot of people will probably end up around the double-digit weekly sets, maybe 10 to 20 sets per week. I think most people will, assuming you're taking long rests between sets, I think that's where most people will probably end up. But, some people may be less and some people may be more. So,
of course. Thank you. Is there any evidence that there is a good way of cycling the volume somehow, or is it just about progressive overload from your point of view?
I mean, overall, I think it's about progressive overload, but at some point, like you can't just keep increasing your volume. And if increases in volume are not working, well, then, maybe that's a sign that you got to back off. And so I'm kind of a favor of what I would call reactive deloads or reactive changes in your volume. So like I said, you've been training at a certain volume, you've tried bumping it up, it's not working. Then I'd say, okay, well then back way off on your volume and it's time to deload, really dramatically decrease your volume, because it doesn't take very much volume to maintain what you've got. I mean, you can maintain on what, anywhere from 1/6 to 1/9 of the volume that you've been doing. So cut way back on your volume, maybe it's a good time to change exercises, something like that. And then start a whole progression again. So that's kind of how I favor volume cycling right now, is just, increasing your volume as needed and then decreasing it as needed, based on your performance. So, so everything it's very, it's basically just a form of auto regulation of your volume, really. So.
Mm-hmm. And if someone wants to specialize on certain muscle group, let's say pecs, for example, is there some special way to do it? The most effective way according to studies?
I think if you wanted to specialize on a body part, I think being that it doesn't take much volume to maintain what you have, and I know Brian Cron is a big fan of this. Mm-hmm. You can spend, a fair number of weeks just focusing on one body part, and ramping up your volume on that one body part, while basically just doing a maintenance volume for everything else. If you really wanted to specialize, because remember, it doesn't take much volume to maintain. So, if you've got a really lagging body part, and you really want to bring it up, you can really focus on that and cut your volume on everything else. And, you'll still maintain what you've got on everything else. So.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that a few years ago, Dr. Mike Zordos did some study on himself, or case study probably, that he squatted every day and he still gained quite a lot of strength on the squat. I think few kilograms, maybe 10 kilograms, I don't know. So should we try something like this, to overload it that much? Or is there really the evidence that just do as much as you have to, not more? If you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's hard. There's different camps of thought on that. I tend to basically just do as much as you have to. I mean, if you're thinking in terms of especially training longevity and, if I could go back to when I was younger, I would probably do some things differently, because I'm a lot older now, and obviously some of my joints and stuff, I have some issues from, my years of training and stuff. So, if I were to go back, I would probably do things a little bit differently, and I would, keep my volume, basically just where I had to keep it as long as I was progressing, and then only increase it as needed. So I think from a training longevity standpoint, I think that approach is probably a little better than being super aggressive with volume increases on a specialization phase. Not to say that there's no value in that. I'm just saying if you're thinking in terms of your longevity, probably doing just what you have to do probably is going to work a little better, I'd say, in the long run. So,
And from the longevity standpoint, is it also better to, let's say, train with lighter weights?
I'd say so. I mean, not that you have to go super light, but there's not really any good evidence that you have to train in the strength ranges for good hypertrophy. Now, there's some people that will argue, well, if you do these strength phases, maybe it'll enhance your hypertrophy phases and stuff like that. But when you look at the literature, it right now, there's not enough data. It doesn't necessarily seem to support that. So I would say, if you're purely just interested in longevity, you don't even really need to do your strength loading stuff. If you like to do it, then that's fine. But if you're purely a bodybuilder or physique person and you don't really care about strength, you really don't need to do the super heavy stuff, and the super heavy stuff, especially if your volume is high, it's going to do some wear and tear. Brad did a volume match study where, one group basically trained like kind of powerlifting style and another group trained bodybuilding style, but it was volume equated. So both groups did the same volume, but the powerlifters were training a lot heavier. And the people training the powerlifting style, they were complaining their joints were hurting. And the people training the bodybuilding style felt like they could do more, but both groups gained the same amount of muscle size. So if you're purely interested in physique, and you don't really care about strength, then literally you could go decades and not even do a single strength phase if you didn't want to. Because really, I think it's a lot of people say it's the volume, which sometimes I would say in some cases you can get repetitive type injuries, but to me, most of the data I've seen would suggest that loading itself is probably more of an issue in terms of injuries over the long run than I would say volume is, at least. So,
Thank you.
I mean, I know for myself, even that's been my experience. I know most of the nagging injuries that I've had hasn't come from training with volume. It's come from either training heavy, training too heavy for too long, or just stuff like that, or training heavy with in exercises where there's a little bit more risk. For example, dips. I used to love to do weighted dips. Like I would go super heavy on them. Like 5 rep maxes, stuff like that. And now I can't do dips anymore because, all those years of training that way on dips just took a toll on my shoulders. And now I can't even do that exercise anymore, because it's, a dip as an exercise definitely puts your shoulders in a more compromising position. So, training that way and training super heavy, in the long run, obviously when I was younger, I thought it was cool being able to, load all this weight on me and be able to do dips with it. But now if I were to go back, I would do things a lot differently than I did then. So
it's funny. I do the same things with the dips as you said. So I should change some things as I see. Okay.
I know.
Okay.
I mean, it's hard though, because it's fun, right? It's fun
exactly.
It's fun to hang these plates from you, like have these big plates hanging from you and do dips. But yeah, it's like I can't do that. I just can't do dips, and they were my favorite exercise for a long time. And like, I can't do them anymore, so.
Could we explain to, let's say, the beginners who are listening, practical differences between training as a competitor and as a general population who wants to gain some muscle?
I think, I think kind of the differences are, I mean, if you're just a person who just wants to gain some muscle, you don't need to train with that much volume. I mean, you can do really well with a super low volume routine, for years, and I think that's great for general fitness purposes because, someone who's just interested in general fitness, they've got other obligations, they don't care about getting as jacked as possible or as ripped as possible or whatever. So they don't need to put the time in, and being that, these people have business obligations, family obligations, stuff like that. You can structure a training system that doesn't require much time that they can stick to over the long run for general fitness purposes. Now, obviously, if you are a physique competitor, bodybuilding competitor, then yeah, you got to put in more time, right? I mean, if you're a bodybuilder, obviously you want to train every muscle group, right? And so, that takes time, if you're going to do it consistently. So I'd say it's just kind of the main difference, I'd say, is in terms of the volume that you need. And like I said, general fitness, for example, like, a bodybuilder definitely will want to do some isolation work, right? But a general fitness, they don't, I mean, if they enjoy doing some isolation work, sure, but they don't need to, they can just get away with some basic compound movements and call it good, right? So I think those are some of the main differences I think that you'll see.
Makes sense. Are there any specifics when you deload while dieting? How to go about it?
Yeah, that's a tough one. If you're going to deload while dieting, I would say, I'd say that's probably a good time to either schedule diet breaks in conjunction with the deload, or at least reduce your deficit, because you're going to be reducing your training stimulus for a short period of time. I think you need to at least back off on the dietary stimulus. I think that's going to be the best way to maintain your muscle during deloads, and like I said, a deload doesn't need to last longer than a week or two. So, you can deload and take a 1 week diet break where maybe you just go to maintenance, or maybe just, cut your deficit. So it's just a very small deficit, and I think you can be good that way, so, but I don't recommend going full, staying full blown in an aggressive deficit and deloading at the same time. So.
Well, it's possible that if you deload, you will lower your calorie output, right? So maybe on the
Well,
similar, or is it
yeah,
not right?
but weight training doesn't make that much different. It doesn't impact your energy expenditure that much as far as your training volume.
So still
Like
adjusted.
what you do. So I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference in your total daily energy expenditure where it's going to make that much difference in your
Mhm.
caloric output. So
Okay. Okay. Are there any tips from you how to avoid binging?
oh I'm a big fan of uh not I'm a big fan of a flexible dieting approach. So basically allowing yourself, certain types of foods within the context of a diet, um, not saying certain things are, quote unquote off limits.
Mhm.
Uh, because I think if you completely cut things out, I think it just increases the risk of binging. I'm also a big fan of smaller deficits. They're just easier to maintain and sustain over a longer period of time. For especially physique competitors, things like that, I favor much longer prep periods, where to give yourself time to, number one, have a smaller deficit, number two, have frequent diet breaks, where you return to maintenance. I think those are the types of things that I think that are important to help prevent binging over the long run. So
I've had a talk with Dr. Campbell, and we discussed some study that there. It looks like that the diet breaks does not seem to be useful as we thought before, but still there is a use in practice with the clients, right?
yeah, and that's the thing. It's like diet breaks, there's not necessarily a physiological benefit, but there definitely is a psychological benefit. And in fact, um, uh, my mind's going blank. I was an author on a paper out of Australia, and the lead author's name, like I can picture him in my mind, and for some reason my mind's just going blank right now. But um, he just recently published a paper on this, and yeah, he looked at the physiological effects of diet breaks, and there wasn't necessarily a physiological benefit, but when interviewing the subjects and stuff, there definitely seemed to be a certain psychological benefit to it. So, I'm a big fan, even if the physiological benefits are questionable. The psychological benefits of diet breaks, I think, are huge. So we should never like discount those.
Yeah, I have to agree with this. With my clients also, they say the same thing, that it really helps them to somehow tolerate the next period of the diet better.
Yeah.
Do you use reverse dieting or not?
Personally, I'm not a fan of reverse dieting, simply because I think you're just prolonging the deficit. I'm more of a fan of returning to maintenance as soon as possible. Um, you know, um, I think the reason why some people say that reverse dieting works is, um, you know, I think some people have a tendency to, when they start to go back to maintenance, they want to have a tendency to binge, right away. And so it kind of forces them to kind of ease back into, a maintenance period. But the problem with that is you're just prolonging your energy deficit for a much longer period of time. And so I'm a much bigger proponent of just returning immediately to maintenance. But at the same time, that's also why I'm a fan of a much longer prep period and slower fat loss, because so when you do return to that maintenance phase, there's not it's not as much of a, especially because you go on that maintenance diet and you're immediately going to have an increase in body weight, just for as you're going to have more food in your digestive tract, you're going to have more water weight, stuff like that. I think for some people psychologically that can, people take that as like, oh my God, I'm gaining all this weight, I must be gaining this fat. You're not, as long as you're assuming you're on maintenance calories, you're not binging. But yeah, personally, I think from a physiological standpoint, I'd say it's better to return immediately to maintenance. from a psychological perspective, though, you know, for some people, if reverse dieting works better for them as far as adherence, then, you know, obviously it works better for them. So
I think the reverse dieting works mostly on the need changes, right? Because, you know, you get less tired, let's say, you move more, you can burn more calories, more daily steps, let's say, etc. And I think this can affect it, but well, it has its place, maybe in a psychological from the psychological standpoint, as you say. How important is testosterone for building muscle?
Here's the deal. This is what's misunderstood about testosterone. Testosterone tends to affect your base level of muscle mass, not necessarily your relative gains in mass. So what I mean by that is that the reason men typically have more muscle than women is because men have a higher base level of testosterone. But men, in terms of their percentage gains in muscle mass, when they start training, women and men actually have the similar percentage gains. Their relative gains are similar in muscle, right? So like if a man has a 10% increase in muscle, a woman will also have a 10% increase in muscle with training, even though the woman's testosterone levels are way lower. So testosterone doesn't increase your relative gains. You still have the same percentage gains. So someone might ask, well, how come bodybuilders get so big then? Because, you know, they're on so much testosterone. It's because the testosterone is elevating their base level of muscle that they can hold on to. You know, but there's, you know, so for example, without testosterone, let's just say I have 100 pounds of muscle, right? I gain 10%. That means I gain 10 pounds of muscle, right? If I take testosterone, now my base level of muscle automatically goes up to say, let's say 120 pounds. 10% of 120 pounds is now 12 pounds. So even though it's a 10% gain in both cases, one case, the absolute gain is greater because the base level was greater. And so that's really how testosterone impacts gains. So that's why someone, even in a, you know, people used to say, well, as long as your testosterone is in a physiological range, it doesn't matter. I say that's actually not really true. There is good enough data to suggest that, for example, if you compare men in the lower end of the testosterone, because the range that's considered normal is fairly wide in men. If you compare a man who's in the low end of the range and a man who's in the high end of the range, typically men in the higher end of the range will carry more muscle. You know, it's not a huge amount more, but I did an estimate on my site one time. I don't remember what it was. I don't know. I'd have to look at the numbers, but basically for every 100 nanogram per deciliter increase in testosterone, it was something like an extra, I don't know, ½ kilo to 1 kilo of fat-free mass. I don't remember exactly. So given that, yeah, there is actually an advantage to having higher baseline levels of testosterone. But if you have high testosterone, that doesn't mean your percentage gains in muscle are going to be greater. It just means your baseline is going to be higher. So
in a physiological, let's say, in a physiological, how do you say it, standpoint, if you have a super physiological, you know, injecting testosterone, that it might be different, right? That is why the bodybuilders have that much.
Well, no, even with super physiological doses, because there's actually a study done where they gave people, is a famous New England Journal of Medicine study where they gave people super physiological doses. And the interesting thing is that their relative gains in muscle were not necessarily increased by the testosterone. It was their baseline muscle was increased. So most of the gain came, so there wasn't necessarily, let me put it this way, there doesn't seem to be a big synergistic effect between training and testosterone, right? So if you're taking super physiological doses of testosterone, that doesn't necessarily going to gain now 20% muscle versus 10% muscle. What that super physiological dose of testosterone does is just elevates your baseline level, whether you were training or not. And now when you have a bigger baseline, now a 10% gain is much bigger in terms of absolute muscle mass, right?
Okay.
Like I said, 10% of 150 is 15 versus 10% of 100, right? Both cases is still only 10%, but the person who has a baseline level of 150 pounds because they're on testosterone now gains 15 pounds of muscle versus 10 pounds of muscle for the same training. So
it's very interesting. Thank you for explaining this.
Yeah.
Mr. Krieger, why has testosterone levels decreased in last 30 years? And is it really the case? Or 100 years, I
don't know. I've seen people speculate as to the reasons why, that I don't, I don't really have an answer to. I mean, you'll see people speculate, I'm not really well read in the literature as far as testosterone levels over the decades. I mean, I know testosterone levels drop with age, but as far as testosterone levels in the general population going down over decades, right? As far as the average testosterone for a male 20 years old today versus 20 years old, 50 years ago, I'm not really well read on that literature, so.
I wanted to ask if you think there is a role of obesity in this, but now I have an answer.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it certainly, I mean, we do know obesity plays a role in lower testosterone, I mean, the question is, you'd have to answer that question, you'd have to basically control for BMI and see, in people with normal BMIs, has it changed, over the years? Because if it hasn't, then we know that obesity obviously has played a role, so, because we do know that obesity definitely seems to play a role in decreased testosterone. So,
do you think, how to put this, do you think it is a good thing for, let's say, older men to use TRT if their testosterone
I'd say, yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's a highly individual decision, and obviously someone needs to discuss with a physician, and it's dependent on where your levels are at, and is there, are you having some symptoms and things like that? But that's I don't think there's any across the board recommendation that you can make to people. I think it's really super highly individual on that, so.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask you one thing about stock trading. Would you?
Oh yeah.
Would you recommend something to, let's say, I am a beginner in stock trading. I want to start. Do you have some tips? Some things you would do differently when you've started?
So are you talking about I mean, it depends. So when you say stock trading, are you talking about day trading, things like that, like I do?
Yeah.
Or are you talking about more long-term investing?
Well, I personally am a fan of long-term investments. Let's say 10 years, 20 years. We'll see how long it will be, of course. But I am interested also about trading because I'd never tried this. So maybe
so here's what I tell people that are interested in trading, short-term trading, like day trading, swing trading, like I do. Number one, I tell them it's very, very difficult, and it may take you years to become successful. I mean, a lot of people, they want to think that trading is this easy money or something like that. Hey, you just push some buttons and you start making money. It's not like that at all. I mean, the stats show something like 90% of day traders lose money. Most quit after a year. It's something that's very difficult. And unfortunately, the past few years, especially in the United States, there were a lot of people that thought they were getting good at trading, but really they just won what I'd call the liquidity lottery, which means, the Fed was basically injecting all this liquidity into the markets, which just made even the trashiest stocks go up in price. And so everyone thinks that, I can make all this money or whatever. I think people are starting to learn the hard way that it isn't that easy now. If you want to be a consistently profitable trader, I mean, being a consistently profitable trader is like basically trying to become a professional poker player, because day trading, short-term trading is basically what we call a zero-sum game. So that means for someone to win, someone else has to lose. That's very different from long-term investing in index funds and things like that. that's a positive sum game. That's a different dynamic. But day trading, like, I've done really well trading, but all the money I've made is money I've taken from other people. It's just, that's the way it is. I'm basically I'm playing a giant game of professional poker with, a lot of other people, right? So you have to understand that that's the game you're going to be playing. And there's going to be a lot of people who are much more experienced than you, if you're a beginner, who know what they're doing. So if you're going to do it, you need to be prepared. Number one, I actually usually discourage people from doing it because it's very, very hard. It's a lot harder than what people think it's going to be. It took me years to become consistently profitable to get where I'm at now. If you're going to do it, number one, don't start with real money right away. Usually I tell people, open a paper trading account where you just start with fake money. And try to just, get the mechanics down. If you're looking for trading education, most sites are junk. Stay away from anyone who promises to sell you some, trading system that will work. Because here's the deal. If it works so well, then why are they advertising it? Like me, that's like a professional poker player saying that he's going to give you his secrets. He's not, right?
Yeah, of course.
I've had people ask me, hey, can you teach me your specific strategies? I'm like, no, because if I do, then I lose my edge, right? The thing about trading is if too many people follow a specific strategy, it doesn't work anymore, right?
Makes sense.
Now, that's not to say there's not some good trading education sites out there, but they're few and far between. The best ones are the ones that teach you concepts, understanding certain concepts, but you still have to do the work yourself. So that's another thing I want to tell people. If you're interested in becoming trading, you have to be prepared to do a lot of hours of work, a lot of hours of studying, a lot of hours in front of the screen. Some people think, oh, I'd love to trade and quit my full-time job. Let me tell you, there are days where I've spent more hours just studying and trying to refine my edge, more hours spent doing that than I would at a full-time job. So, it is a very, very difficult endeavor. And so I want people to understand that it is not easy money. It's actually, I've always called it the hardest, easiest way to make money. The easy part is pushing the buttons. The hard part is actually finding some type of statistical edge where you're going to make money over time. Also managing your psychology. There's a huge psychological component to it. So if you're a beginner, like I said, try some paper trading first. Find a few trading educational sites that aren't over-promising, what they can deliver to you, that they aren't promising these huge returns or whatever. That's always a red flag if they are. And then go from there. But I will say nothing beats just time in front of the screen, just watching the markets. Like literally all my strategies I've developed for myself have become from me just watching things every day, seeing certain things start to happen over and over again and say, hey, how can I maybe start to develop a strategy around this? So yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing this. How do you decide how much of your budget you allocate to long-term investments and to the day trading?
So I actually have completely separate account. So I have my day trading accounts, which are basically even under a business umbrella, my stock trading company that is that way I can actually as the CEO, I can pay myself a salary from my trading profits and everything. So obviously I have to keep a certain amount in there to be able to trade with, because it takes money to make money in the stock market, right? But what I do is I typically take some of my profits and then I take them out of those accounts, and then I just put them in long-term investing, like index funds, things like that. For me, it's I pay myself about 10% of what's in my accounts per month from my day trading accounts, and then usually put that money away somewhere, long-term investing, retirement, stuff like that. So, it's going to vary depending on someone's financial situation. If you are looking to trade, I would say if you're a beginner, put most of your stuff in index funds.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to actually trade with real money, just take a very small amount, an amount that you don't mind losing. Because chances are, if you're starting out, you will lose it. I'm just telling you right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've blown out my accounts more than once, and almost every successful trader I know have gone through that process of learning what not to do. You know, so you have to be prepared for blowing an account out. So, you know, whatever you start to try to trade with, just do with a very small amount of money. Once you've learned the mechanics, I'd say with paper trading, just do it with a very, very small amount of money, an amount of money that you don't mind losing, and then start from there. Because here's the deal. If you can't make money even with a small amount, you're certainly not going to make money with a bigger amount.
But just the risk is higher.
Yeah. So,
Makes sense.
so my advice to people is always start super small, start really, really small. And yeah, I mean, sock most of your money away in long-term index funds, stuff like that. And then, day trading, if you're interested in more short-term trading, you have to treat that money kind of like play money, and that you're willing to lose it, so.
I'm investing for, let's say, 2 years now, but I am glad that I started just because I may make some money. I can buy new shoes, new car, etc. I don't do it. I just love that this money have some use in the world.
Yeah.
And also it makes another money. So I think investment really changed my life, to be honest. I'm not saying that I will be millionaire, but I'm just see, the potential that my money can make other money, and it's quite exciting.
And that's the thing. It's like, it just takes a lot of patience too. It's like, too many people want to get rich quick, and it's like, even my day trading is like, I mean, people got to understand that I only risk on every trade I make, I only risk 2% of my money on per trade, so I'm not, it's not like I'm, now the amount of money that I risk in a single trade might be, in terms of absolute dollars, might be a lot to someone, being that given the size of my trading accounts, but for me, it's always been 2%. That's 2 pennies on the dollar that I'm risking, and I won't risk more than that per trade, and so even with my day trading, which you'd think is like trying to make money quickly, I'm still risking very small amounts, and so you need patience, whether you're a day trader or whether you're a long-term investor. Long-term investing is just like, 8% gain per year, you think, making 8 cents on the dollar, that doesn't seem like much, but it compounds over time. And so over 10, 20 years, it actually really adds up. And so you have to kind of, it's kind of like fat loss, right? It's like, if someone, let's say someone has obesity and they need to lose 100 pounds, it isn't about losing 100 pounds. It's about losing 1 pound 100 times, right? And you kind of have to take investing the same way. It's about accumulating small amounts over time and not trying to, gain a bunch at once. So.
Was it Einstein who said that compound interest is the strongest force in the universe? I think.
Somebody said that.
Yeah. One last thing. Did you, before, when you've been starting with the day trading, did you risk more than the 2% of that budget? If you lowered how much
there have been some times where I did, and it blew up in my face, right? And that's just how I learned the hard way. And me now, it's like, I never risk more than 2%. Like, it's just, because it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. It's not worth, losing a big chunk of your money, in a very short period of time can really mess you up psychologically too, so it's like, but me losing, if I lose 2% of my money, it's not a big deal, right? And it's like, if I had $1 and I lost 2 cents, that's like a big deal, and it also gives you room to, like, what if you go on a losing streak? There are times where I've had multiple losing trades in a row. Well, if I'm only losing 2% at a time, oh, it doesn't hurt me too much if I have a bunch of, losers in a row. So you have to think about that as well, So,
Yeah.
so it's all about, there's a lot of risk management involved. And it's something people need to understand is that whether you're trading or even long-term investing, there's a, when it comes to long-term investing, risk management, diversification, stuff like that, you always, there's some risk involved. So you have to manage that risk,
Yeah, I think the psychology is very important because, I always ask the guests one thing you would recommend to anyone at the end of the podcast. What is your one thing you would recommend to anyone in the world, if there is such a thing?
Just like when you say one thing, like, do you mean like,
for example, have kids, do squats, or invest your money?
Oh yeah, one thing that
what do you think
that's a
is
good question. One thing that I would recommend anyone in the world to do, I would say definitely skydiving. Yeah. I think it's something everyone should just do once. Just the tandem skydiving where you're attached to someone else.
Yeah, I tried that too.
That's an experience I'll never ever forget.
The free fall, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just I'll never.
Yeah.
That's just one thing I'll never ever. It's just stuck in my mind. It's something I'm glad I did. One day. So I guess if you ever have a chance to do some type of experience, like a unique, maybe you can, I think you can more generalize that, some type of unique experience, right? That's maybe outside your comfort zone. It doesn't necessarily have to be skydiving, but some experience that's kind of outside your comfort zone, I think is something everyone should,
Perfect.
do at some point.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Krieger, for accepting my invitation. I'm really grateful. I will let you know when this came out. And thank you very much for your time and have a fine day.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.